I want to thank you all for joining us on our Oxford Impact webinar. This is a very special day, an opportunity for you to hear from our students, from our alums, in terms of the impact that they've had since leaving our programs. And these are dear friends, dear colleagues doing remarkable work. So this is an honor for us to be able to talk with them about their own impact and their own journey after attending the Oxford Impact Investing Program and also the Oxford Social Finance Program. This photo that you're seeing as the beginning of our webinar has special meaning. This actually reflects images from Educate Girls, which is part of a first development impact bond created with UBS Optimus Foundation and Educate Girls, a nonprofit organization in India, specifically to do its mission, educate girls. And so this image is, again, represents the people whose lives social finance and impact investing is seeking to impact positively. So this has special meaning, and I think it really has shaped much of what our students have done since leaving our program. Next slide, please. As always, we want you to see Oxford without rain in its splendor, the spires of Oxford, to bring back fond memories of your time at Oxford. And we always use a metaphor of Oxford being a very special place and an opportunity to meet new colleagues around the world and really begin to understand how capital used wisely can tackle the world's most complex problems. It's an opportunity for us to share groundbreaking ideas around impacting people's lives and the planet that are most vulnerable. And also it's an opportunity to build and strengthen a global network, to allow our alums to really be part of a global community and continue to work together to find solutions that will address the world's complex issues. Next slide, please. Again, a remembrance of what Saïd Business School looks like and feels like. It's a very intense program. Our impact investing program and our social finance program, the two programs I direct, are as we say, we have students for such a short time that we begin early and work late. Saïd Business School, again, is a fairly new business school, but it's designed to create a world-class community to create programs and ideas that have positive global impact. Next slide, please. We have a suite of programs, and many of our students are actually enrolling in all three programs. We started with impact investing. We're going now into our 9th year for impact investing. Social finance, we just wrapped up our 3rd year. And impact measures, we finished our 2nd year this year. And again, it allows us, based on the needs of our students and our alums, what they're most interested in. Impact investing is deal-centric. Social finance is scale-centric. What can we do in blended capital that will allow us to have an impact citywide, countrywide, continent-wide on the Sustainable Development Goals? Impact measures allows us to go deeply into what are the trend-setting ways of measuring impact, both numbers and nuance, to help our students better understand innovative measurement tools. Next slide, please. Again, we work across this ecosystem, the finance ecosystem. And social finance actually goes from traditional philanthropy to traditional business. Impact investing is really, again, at the center of this diagram in social enterprise. And our goal is to catalyze capital across the spectrum to have the greatest positive social change. And I also want to clarify that social change for us means environmental change, it means social change, it means the SDGs, unraveling the wicked. When we think about the complex issues that we're addressing, it feels like this, a ball that's knitted together with strands that are interconnected. And our goal is to help our students unravel and find ways of addressing the complexity. Next slide, please. And the way we do that is through the Sustainable Development Goals, understanding the interrelationship and the systemic nature of these challenges, and yet finding solutions and ways, steps ahead in each of these areas. Next slide, please. Our global network is robust. This is very therapeutic for me to put dots all over the world. We have reached more than 500 students from 90 countries. And the fortunate thing for me as Program Director of Social Finance and Impact Investing is that I'm able to remain connected to many of our students, and both as colleagues and as friends. Next slide, please. So I want to introduce a wonderful woman, Sombo Chunda, who has been, I met her on a bus in Zambia as we were going to a women's leadership program. And that conversation in the van around ethics and morality and investment led her on a journey through our impact investing program. And it's an honor to have Sombo with us to share her reflections on what's happened in the past 5 years after the Oxford Impact Investing Program. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sombo. Then we'll hear from Kirk Prichard from Concern Worldwide and Aldo Soto, who is from our social finance program and with Rainforest Foundation. Thank you. Sombo, over to you.
Thank you, Gayle. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is me. My name is Sombo, and I am currently studying for my PhD in the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. I'm a fellow of the ACCA and the Zambia Institute of Chartered Accountants. I hold an MBA, and I consider myself to be an international development expert. And then I am alumni of the Oxford Impact Investing Program, best experience ever investing that happened to me. Next slide. Okay, so you can see me there in class, and you can see Professor Alex, who's the first tenured professor in social entrepreneurship at Oxford. So I think I was very serious trying to take down all the notes and get all the learning. So I would like to talk briefly about what happened to me whilst I took part in the Oxford Impact Investing Program. And 5 years ago, time goes past so quickly. So just to give a context of the situation that I was in the time that I came to Oxford, the Swedish development organization that I'd been working for as acting country representative then was just considering to close the office in Zambia. And I'd been given a challenge to look for funding if the office was going to continue operations or to close. And in the process, I met Gayle on the van, like she said, and we had this conversation, and it was really interesting and very inspiring for me to take part in the Women Leading Change program. And then when I got to Oxford, I would say that's when things kind of really changed. So in one breath, the back donor that we had worked with said we were going to close the office because they couldn't give us funding anymore. And they actually insisted that if they were going to give us funding or get a conversation going with us, we needed to do things differently from the way we had done them in the past. And then I'm coming into this class and seated there, and I have all this baggage on my shoulders. Where will I get the money from? How is this thing even going to work? I sit in class on the first day. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I'm like, this is really interesting. Looks like this is a place where I needed to be. Then we start having these conversations, and I start thinking to myself, I'm like, wait a minute, this is what I needed. So I learned during my time, during my first day and my second day, and before we even go to the last day, My second day, I started writing. I started writing the concept note that was going to form the proposal that eventually we sent to the back donor. The thought that we needed to be innovative when we propose a new project, by the time I was finishing my second day, was no longer a big mountain in my head. It was very clear what I was going to do. Just during the first, second, and the third day, I was able to see things very clearly. So I had clarity in my mind in terms of what I needed to do, because we met people from different sectors within the UK who were working on social impact and impact issues, working on solving the many social wicked problems that we have. So with all these pieces coming in, personal reflection every night, I had clarity. I had clarity in terms of what I needed to do for me to be able to carry the organization that I worked for forward. And then I was like, so how do I do this? We've always done things this way, and we've always been able to get funding, and the donors have changed. So I was like, if I start thinking of transforming relationships with the back donor, if I start thinking of this same platform that we have used to carry out our projects, but then in a different way, how about enhancing collaborations between the different actors? And how about bringing in new partners that we have not worked with traditionally? And in terms of thinking of the new partners that I thought we would bring on board for this project, I think one of the days at Oxford, we had somebody coming in and talking about how they were working with the prison system and how that, the reforms in that area were kind of really helping to create social impact on the prisoners, the ex-prisoners. And I was like, this is really interesting. Which actor have we not worked with within the profile of the organization that I had been working for? And I thought about the private sector. We'd not really done a lot of work with the private sector, but they were a very important actor in the communities that we were working in. So it was clear, transform relationships, be very clear with what I want to do, enhance the collaborations that were there, but then also work with new partners, non-traditional partners. So that's how I, kind of continued writing the concept note and eventually the proposal. By the time that I was getting back home to Zambia after the 6 intense days of the program, I was really at a point where the whole concept was there in place, and we were able to submit a proposal, and we were able to raise funding. A total of $2.7+ million came through for funding for a 3-year phase of the project. So that was really, really interesting. Next slide. Yes. So between 2014 to 2016, what happened? So the funding came through. I was able to raise $2.7 million+ to start working on this project that was going to focus on enhancing collaboration between the private sector, the local community partners that we had worked with, the nonprofit organizations in Zambia. We also worked with the traditional leaders, something that we had not done initially in the past. So in terms of the impact that has been created as a result of participating in the Oxford Impact Investing Program, I like to look at this at 2 different levels. First, it is the institutional level. So we got in the $2.7 million. Then next, we were able, working with the partners, to influence a number of policies. And it's kind of really interesting to see how things change when you do certain things. So in the new program that we had started, we were very deliberate with working with the local government. We were very deliberate with working with the local people, the partners that we had done the work with all the time. And then we worked with the private sector. And at that time, it's something that had not really been so common, where you see non-profit sector or civil society in Zambia working with the private sector. So we worked with the mining corporations over in Northwestern Province. And it was kind of a really interesting project, because when you're running a project like that, sometimes you get to have backlash depending on where you are in the world. There was a little bit of backlash, conversations going around. What are they doing? Is this even going to work? And also within the organization, you get to have, you know, people like looking at you and they're saying, okay, we see how this is going to go. Is this going to work? But if you have great leadership, and I think we had great leadership both at the head office in Stockholm and at the regional office in Nairobi, where people believe in you and they believe that what you're going to do really is going to create social change and create a lot of social impact, then kind of things, you know, fall in place. So fortunately, the project had been able at that time to have, you know, meaningful impact coming in terms of influencing the policy level, and then also just in terms of ensuring that the resources that were there, you know, in the local authorities that we've been working with were being used in the right way and directed towards projects that were going to create a lot more social change in people's lives. So that's at institutional level. And then I left in 2016. I left Diaconia in 2016, and I came to school here at Virginia Commonwealth University. So we can go to the next slide. So I share about what's been going on. So between 2016, when I left to debt, I came to school, and I was very fortunate to work in the Division of Community Engagement. It is under the Office of the Provost and under the Vice Presidency for Academic Affairs in the university. And because of my Oxford Impact Investing Program and because of the work that I had done with community partners in Zambia, when I did the interview for this job, I emphasized the fact that I am so much interested in impact. And I was asking questions. What is the impact of Virginia Commonwealth University on the communities that we have around? If I take a walk in the street just as a random person and I ask, what do the people think about the university? Are they going to say the same story that we have on the DCE website, which says that we have impacted so many people? So I came in asking these questions about how do we think about impact? Is the story that we have the same as the story that people in the community we serve have? So it was kind of really interesting. And, you know, having just graduated from the Oxford Impact Investing Program a few years ago and just having this conversation going was really, really nice. And it helped me and it helped my colleagues to think differently about the conversations that we have. If we say the something and the community say the something, then we're on the same page. But if we say that we're creating a lot of impact and the community says something different, then we have to sit back and, you know, just learn. What can we learn? What can we do differently? So I worked in the division and working on various impact projects, trying to get us to think differently about how we're doing things and also how we can reach out to a lot more people. And then I started my studies in the PhD program in 2017. And I always say that I'm very fortunate that the school and the studies that I am doing are really focusing on social issues. So the Wilder School really is a champion of social equity. Actually, a few years ago, the school won an award as a social equity champion. So we consider issues around social impact and social equity, social and economic justice to be very important and very central in the education process. Next slide. Great. So what next? I'm in school and I've had this nice experience from Oxford, which I have used a lot. I think over the last 3 years, I've been able to get more than 8 or 10 awards, and I've always linked back to my story at Oxford. So in terms of my research and what I am working on right now, I'm looking at the determinants for women entrepreneurship in emerging markets. And my concern there really is, have we been asking the right questions when we talk to women? When we have conversations with women entrepreneurs, are we asking them the right questions? Are those questions helping us to come up with policies that are going to be responsive and help women to contribute even more as entrepreneurs? I am looking at issues around access to funding for women. We know that the playing field is not leveled. We know that very few women are able to access financing for them to do their work. And then I'm also looking at corruption, you know, so it kind of, okay, so funding and corruption, yeah. So I am looking at corruption and I'm asking questions around how does corruption affect women entrepreneurs? because the reality is that corruption exists anywhere in the world. So, and in thinking about funding and in thinking about corruption, it's because I don't want the parts of me that I have worked on so hard to kind of fall off. I want parts of me that I have worked on so hard to kind of be part of the bigger and the greater research agenda that I have. But then also, I believe that if I look at issues that affect women and issues that hinder women from becoming better entrepreneurs, I will be contributing and I will be part of a larger conversation, and I'll be helping to create social change at an even larger scale. Next slide. Okay, yeah, so I also just wanted to say that, you know, in terms of what next and what I see for the future, I think social problems will keep evolving, and we need to start having within us strategies to come up with solutions even before the problems emerge. I've been thinking a lot lately around artificial intelligence and just how the policy sector, the public policy sector is kind of lagging behind in terms of coming up with policies. Are we already thinking as people that work around social impact, impact investing, the impact that artificial intelligence is going to have? Are we already thinking of how we're going to retrain people, for example, whose jobs are not going to still be relevant when AI comes to full force? So I think there are going to be a new set of social problems, but we have to be proactive when we think about how we're going to work with those problems when they come to being. So I will end here.
Thank you, Sombo. That was wonderful. And again, I think that when we were in Lusaka talking about women's leadership, there was a phrase, and it's what deliberate leadership is about, from Audre Lorde, deliberate and afraid of nothing. And when I think about your work, you embody that, as do Kirk and Aldo. So thank you so much. I'm going to introduce Kirk Prichard, who's the Vice President of Concern Worldwide US. And Kirk is, and Aldo were in our social finance course in 2018. And both of them, you know, we pay, just as Sombo did, special attention to the role of nonprofit organizations as navigators and translators for change. As we deal with the SDGs and as countries move up the scale of eliminating poverty, the SDGs are going to be focusing on those fragile states and most vulnerable people and planet in countries that are the greatest risk. So Kirk, I'm going to let you talk about how your role has evolved as a navigator and translator after our course in social finance last year.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gayle. So yeah, my name is Kirk Prichard. Next slide. I was asked to talk about kind of three things. The first was, who are you? And that's me there in the bottom right, about to get crushed by about 1,000 felt green blankets. And I think this was Nepal. And I chose this picture because I kind of felt at the time it was very, it was a good metaphor for, you know, like all the problems that are coming at us in this world. You know, it can seem overwhelming. They can seem to like kind of, you know, be too much for one person to handle. And that really is the case. You know, we have everything from climate change to wars to nutrition problems to flooding to natural disasters, you name it. And it can really be kind of overwhelming, and there's so much that needs to be done and so many people that we need to reach that it can feel overwhelming at times. I work for an organization called Concern Worldwide. Next slide, please. It was founded actually about 50 years ago in response to the famine in Biafra. So that's a picture from 50 years ago. Modern day Nigeria. We're currently operational in about 24 or 25 countries. We tend to focus on the bottom 40 of the HDI, so the bottom 40 of the Human Development Index, doing a lot of nutrition work, education, livelihoods, and emergencies. But that kind of bottom 40 thing is what sets us apart and makes us unique. And I'll come back to that in a second when I talk a little bit more about how we want to take this and where we want to go with it. Next slide. And then the next one, please. So bearing that in mind, about over a year ago now, we went to this social finance course, and I'm sure those of you that have taken the course or those of you who are familiar with it will recognize this. This picture here is of the kind of I would argue, the foundation of social finance spectrum. And I actually refer to it almost every day. I have a picture of it up in my office and everything. because I think it's really important for NGOs to recognize the range of interventions that are possible within this kind of social finance spectrum. We always joke around here that in the nonprofit world, if you mention the words finance or impact or or investing, NGOs kind of shudder and recoil in horror. And that really shouldn't be the case, because you don't have to be trying to make profit off people. You don't have to be trying to go down these, quote unquote, worse ways. There's such a spectrum and range of things you can be doing within social finance that really work to both the benefit of private sector, public sector, and especially the communities that we work in. So we tend to kind of focus on that kind of left half, that blended social finance and that social value thing, more than all the way over on the right on the kind of market rate financial value. But it really is a great kind of way of showing how there's so much room in there for everyone and various organizations, regardless of what your kind of motivation or desire is. So the other thing that this chart really pointed out to me was that, and I think it's really what gave me the impetus to really push on this going out of the class, was that if you look at those values at the top, and then you look back at those overwhelming problems that I referenced to, with the blankets kind of overwhelming me, is that there's just way too many problems to be solved by like the far left-hand side alone. I mean, it says 250 billion in social value up there as the kind of far left, but I mean, often it's even less than that. If you look at the humanitarian needs every year, there's, $30 billion is what's referenced by the UN, and only a fraction of that is ever made. And then if you even get into the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, I mean, you're talking about trillions upon trillions of dollars that are going to be needed if we're going to meet those. And there's only way that we can get in those if we start moving towards that right of the spectrum. There's the only way that we're going to be able to make those and meet those goals and really have that massive impact and solve those problems that we need. Next slide, please. So that was one key takeaway that I had from it, from the course, is that chart and how we needed to hop onto that spectrum and really get moving if we're going to solve those problems. But the other thing that I really took away is how NGOs and some of the other actors that are moving into the space are really speaking different languages and are definitely bringing new and different things to the table. And that if we want to have the best impact for the people that we're ultimately trying to reach, which I think is why we're all here and all on this webinar, is that we're trying to solve, or alleviate problems that are happening in this world, we really need to work better together, and we need to be speaking the same language. And that's where this concept of a navigator and translator came out that Gayle was referencing to. And we've been working on a course of study to this effect about how people getting into the social finance realm must really work with the communities, especially, and NGOs and community-based organizations, if they're going to actually achieve things, and if they're actually going to get their work done in an effective and impactful manner. And the other aspect of that I really wanted to focus on is that's especially true if we're going to move into those bottom 40 HDI countries. If we're going to work in these conflict and fragile affected states and these people that are most in need of assistance, you cannot just go in there. You can't just roll in on your own or in a private sector scenario. You really need to have a navigator, a translator on the ground, a community-based organization or NGO that has the trust, that has the experience working there if you're going to get anything done. And that's really what I'm pushing for, is that if you look at the SDGs, one of the overarching frameworks is that you're supposed to reach the furthest behind first. So that's the concept that, you shouldn't go for the low-hanging fruit. You shouldn't go for the easy targets. You really need to focus on those areas that are most difficult. So, and I was worried that in this new space, in the social finance realm, is that people were all too often going for quote unquote the easier ones, the easier areas to work in, where they might already have a factory or they might already have relationships. And that's great, people need help wherever, but I think we really need to make sure that we don't lose focus on reaching the furthest behind first. So that was another key aspect that I took away and pushed from that. Next slide, please, Annabelle. And then one more. So out of that, so what kind of happened from those two key takeaways? A lot of key things happened. We're limited on time, so I'm going to focus on kind of one, which is this partnership that Concern Worldwide has just announced with ADM, which is Archer Daniel Midland. And that's really, it's a twofold kind of process that we're going through here. The first is essentially, it's all about essentially agriculture and nutrition in Kenya and Ethiopia. And it's a grant, so there is a grant component of it. So that's the far left of that spectrum there, which is providing nutrition services to severely acute malnourished children in Kenya. And and then livestock and livelihood and agriculture components in Ethiopia as well. So it's a dual-pronged approach. But then as we kind of move farther towards the right of that, we're also working on some of the more middle of the road area of that as well, working with ADM on co-designing products, on really getting out there and, you know, having ideation sessions and seeing where we can both use our talents, what they can bring as a large multinational corporations with thousands of really experienced people and resources, supply chains, value add, you know, all these other things, how they can help us as well to do better and more impactful work. So next slide. And then that all comes back to this, which is why, again, why we're all here, is this concept that as a result of that partnership and our engagement with this course, there's going to be 50,000 people in Kenya and Ethiopia that have significantly improved nutrition and better agriculture impacts and inputs. So I think that's really why I wanted to close with this slide, which is why we're all here, is that we're trying to get to this. We're trying to have better programming. We're trying to have more impactful programming, and we're trying to tap some of those new and different ways of working to have bigger and broader impact to, you know, ultimately reach those SDGs. So I look forward to the discussion and the conversations and questions after this. And yeah, that's about it. Gayle, is that okay?
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. Thank you. And Kirk and Aldo were actually guest faculty at Social Finance 2019. Again, we're bringing our students back to share their impact and also their learning. And actually, both Aldo and Kirk received high marks in terms of really grounding our students in real impact on the ground, whether it's Indigenous people, whether it's addressing issues of climate change or hunger, and so keeping front and center who's at the heart of what social finance and impact investing really mean. I want to turn this over to Aldo Soto, who again, as we've watched this summer with great alarm, the Amazon on fire, as well as Siberia, you know, in Alaska, places around the world on fire, their forests on fire because of climate change. And that the Amazon, again, it represents the lungs of our world and our planet. And and Aldo has been working very hard on helping preserve the Amazon. And I think it's wonderful for him to join us and describe his work and what impact he's seeking to have, again, informed by his passion and by the social finance course. So Aldo, over to you.
Thank you, Gayle, and good afternoon, everyone. I work for the Rainforest Foundation UK, which is a charity based in London that supports Indigenous people in the Amazon and in the Congo basins. Basically, we support Indigenous people's organizations on the ground to secure their lands and protect their forests. And my background is in ecology and conservation. I have worked for more than 15 years in the Amazon with field experience, researching and doing conservation with of endangered species, but also working with Indigenous communities, and also at the policy level with decision makers, government officials, and now with impact investors. So we all know the global importance of the Amazon, right? For the planet and for our own survival. And probably you also know that we are very close to an irreversible tipping point where the Amazon will lose its capacity to generate enough rain to sustain itself and will start drying and becoming a savanna. And this could happen in 20, 25 years, although a recent study said that we're only 2 years away from this real catastrophe. So I'm going to speak today about the key role of Indigenous peoples for the protection of the Amazon and how impact investors could support its protection while also improving Indigenous people's livelihoods. Next slide, please. Let me tell you about the Asháninka people in the Andean Amazon of Peru. They have lived for centuries between mountain forests and the Andean foothills, basically in their traditional territories. Next slide, please. In 2010, the Peruvian government signed an energy treaty to build 5 large dams in the Peruvian Amazon, basically to export electricity to Brazil to feed their aluminium industry. And the environmental and social impact of those projects would have been enormous. All the communities, all the Asháninka communities from the Ena River would have been displaced completely. And as you know, in theory, hydropower should be a clean energy, but in the Amazon, because they have to flood so many hectares of forest, actually the emissions from those forests are higher than actually the benefits from those projects. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the communities raised their case to the international media. They went to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. They basically unite and fight together to stop these projects, and they managed to do it. Also with support, of course, from NGOs. And actually, they stopped not only the project on their lands, but also all the 5 projects. Which was a really huge success. Nonetheless, the communities which are almost 100% dependent on the forest for survival were facing more structural challenges like malnutrition, very poor quality of education, and exclusion from the local economy. Next slide, please. Also, the level of pressure on their lands were very high. They were facing threats from illegal loggers, coca leaf producers, which then they sell the coca to basically narco traffic, and those actors usually invade their lands for illegal activities. And also the usual model for agriculture in the forest is by slashing and burning the forest, which is a practice that drives deforestation if it's not well managed. Next slide, please. So as a strategy, these communities organized themselves and founded a producer association called Kemito N to produce cocoa and coffee. Kemito means cacao in Asháninka language, and so the meaning is cacao from the Ena River. And they have managed to export cacao directly for the last 5 years to premium markets and improve producers' incomes. However, they struggle to access enough finance to operate and also investments to grow, to adapt their farms to climate change. You know that SMEs are usually stuck in the middle of enterprise finance, but certainly indigenous peoples' enterprises are in the middle of that middle. It's very difficult for them to access finance. Next slide, please. So let me explain you now about impact bonds and how they could help to address these kind of problems. Well, impact bonds are not bonds. The name is really confusing. Sorry. They are result-based finance instruments where an outcome payer or funder commits capital to achieve certain social or environmental outcomes. Impact investors provide upfront capital to a service provider who usually is an NGO or a group of NGOs, so they can address the problem by implementing a solution. The outcomes are verified by an independent third party, and only then the outcome payments are released according to the level of achievement. This is a very innovative model that has been developed in the UK, and now it's been implemented in many countries. As Gayle mentioned when she opened the webinar, that photo was from the first development impact bond, which was an education impact bond in India. So this impact bond model allows NGOs also high flexibility to adapt the implementation strategy, and because the funder is not focused on the process but only on the outcomes, it's very easy to change the strategy if something is not going well. And also it incentivizes implementers and investors to achieve the outcomes because usually these are a return for the investor, a financial return. Next slide, please. So what we have done in the Rainforest Foundation UK is design an impact bond for an indigenous enterprise for Kemito N, but we think this could be replicable and scalable also. The impact bond has been designed to improve farmers' incomes, to make their farms more resilient to climate change, and to protect their communities' forests. Next slide, please. We have defined a number of metrics, 4 metrics related with the productivity of farms, which is a proxy of the income for the farmers, the implementation of climate smart farms, which is based in an agroforestry model, a combination of cocoa and forestry trees. Reducing deforestation is another metric, very important, and the commercial sustainability of the association, which is becoming a cooperative now, measured by EBITDA, which we think is key because in order to all this continue, we need to make this enterprise commercially viable. Next slide, please. So this is the impact bond structure. I'm not going to go into details, but basically it follows that logic. The outcome payers committing funds, impact investors providing upfront capital, the implementers implement a strategy that could be easily adapted. In this case is inputs as fertilizers, investment in infrastructure for improving quality, of course, tailored technical assistance, land use planning, governance, etc. And then verifiers, one or many verifiers can verify the outcomes, and the outcomes, the outcome payments are released by the outcome payer according to the level of the results. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how an impact investing could support indigenous communities. I believe there's a role and an opportunity for impact investors to invest in indigenous people. Next slide, please. And I would say that studies have shown that when indigenous lands are secure, which means formally titled by the governments, the deforestation rates are 3 times lower. You know, indigenous people live in so isolated areas where intact forests still exist that they hold a vast amount of carbon in their forest land. So it's really very cost effective in terms of mitigating climate change to invest just in securing the land of indigenous people. You will secure not only the forest, the carbon, but also huge amount of biodiversity. Next slide, please. However, those indigenous enterprises, they need certain kind of capital. They need flexible capital. I think impact investors need to have a different approach because most of these enterprises are very small or medium and are growing, so they need appropriate financial tools and specific products. We think the impact bonds could be really useful. And there are many indigenous people enterprises which are basically under the radar of investors and could have an enormous impact potential. And the last slide, please. So just this slide just to show you that what the social finance program can bring to you. During the program last year, Andre Piau from Brazil, another student, and me, we decided to create an organization able that can make finance work for indigenous people. So we are now on that journey together, and I think one of the most useful benefits from me from this course has been having really very good insights from people like Phyllis Constanza from UBS Optimus and Safina Hussein from Educated Girls that were developing they developed the first development impact bond, but also meet people and inspire. That you can be inspired by other speakers, other examples, and you can develop things like this one, like this project that we're doing, that could really make a change. Thank you.
Aldo, thank you so much, and thank you, Kirk and Sombo. We do have some questions that have come in from, we typically in our webinar ask our participants to send in their questions in advance so that we can gear up for those and structure the webinar to address some of those issues. There were several questions around how do you measure impact on SDGs, including carbon reduction, and that ties to the idea of how do you in fact, so for example, saving a tree, what kind of impact does that really have? Saving indigenous communities, what does that really have? So I'd like to open that question to our panel to ask, how do you measure impact, and how important is it to measure impact, both the number side of it and the nuance associated with it? So I'm going to open it up to Kirk and Sombo, Aldo, to answer that question.
I guess I can jump in quickly on a little bit of the measuring impact side, especially around the SDGs, and then I'll leave it to Aldo and Sombo to jump in a little bit on the climate and whatnot side. I mean, the good thing about the SDGs, and one I think is a positive aspect of them, is that each one has fairly substantial indicators for which there must be reporting against. And while and trust me, I was sort of part of the process of developing some of these. It was extremely contentious and difficult to go through. But what it did is it allows things to be seen in a fairly straightforward mindset, which I think the business and social impact investing community can like. I mean, and then to that end, like concern itself, like we focus a lot on nutrition and agriculture. So we're in SDG 2, which is zero hunger, a lot. And there's very concrete things in there, like measuring the amount of undernourishment based on caloric intake and things like that we report on essentially every year. We have something called the Global Hunger Index, which we do, and through our projects we can come up with very concrete indicators that we're measuring on almost a daily basis through our programs and through the interventions that we design. They're not perfect, but they're better than nothing, and I think they give us a good foundation from which to move forward with. Aldo, you want to?
And Kirk, you also have a very rigorous evaluation team within Concern, and I think it's important for colleagues to understand that NGOs can operate like a business. Concern's budget is 180 million, annual budget is 180 million, and you've got what, 300 staff?
Yeah, absolutely, and of which we have dedicated, we call them M&E, monitoring and evaluation teams across the world in 20+ countries. And I mean, this is one of the areas where technology has really helped out as well. Numerous years ago, we tried to move to full digital data gathering to some extent. So we're able to collect more points of information than at any point before. And then when you cross-reference that with some of the satellite stuff that's out there and the climate modeling, I mean, the amount of monitoring and evaluation and impact measurement that we're able to do now, especially with technology and things, is really amazing.
No, that's fantastic. So although there's actually several questions, not only about impact measures regarding carbon reduction, but also this context of what is it like as an NGO working in a place like Brazil, you know, and several countries in Latin America right now are tinderboxes in terms of politics. And the Amazon and conservation and economic development is in the center of those, is the heart of those big conversations. So I think that, you know, there are several questions, Aldo, that it would be great for you to address. Impact measures, the politics of place, and even the reforestation as the best and cheapest way to to capture and avoid CO2. So please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you for the questions. Well, certainly it's very complex with the current government working in Brazil, as you know, by the messages that the government and the president of Brazil has been sharing. Basically, NGOs are almost banned, and even if the president mentioned that the fires were started by NGOs. So it's quite challenging. However, I think people are not against NGO. They know the role that they have, and you know that it's difficult times definitely, but when difficult times are is where most help is needed. So I think Brazil definitely needs a lot of help right now. In terms of reforestation, yes, definitely is the cheapest and the most effective way to capture CO2. I would say it, forest restoration, because we don't want to reforest the Amazon with 1 or 2 species of trees that will be then used for, you know, the timber industry. We want to restore the forest because there are a lot of co-benefits that comes with the forest, not only carbon capture or you know, economic benefits in the long term, but also biodiversity. So there's a huge movement around forest restoration, and even in Europe, you know, with the rewilding movement, which aims to restore the ecosystems. And maybe to also comment on the questions about measure impacts, I think it's yes, definitely is very important to have the correct metrics and to be clear and transparent and to communicate it adequately to investors. So I think in our case, for the impact bond, for example, the metrics are a key component of the whole model, and that's why there's a third party measuring those metrics, those outcomes. So definitely is key, but I agree with Kirk, which they should be simple and cost effective. I think I'll stop that because we run out of time.
Well, I think so. Bryn, is there any other questions that are coming from the audience?
Yeah, we've got a handful of questions. I can read them out to you if that's helpful.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. We'll take a couple more. We'll take a couple questions and we'll wrap up. Yep.
Okay, so we've got one here from Roland. To what extent is your impact focus alongside an industry-friendly Porter's shared value concept, or do we need NGOs to get the ball rolling?
Sombo, that would be a good question for you. I think having worked in you know, with in the issue of corruption, entrepreneurship, and business, what is that relationship? You've built collaborations in a very unique way across sectors. So why don't you talk about that? Can you answer that question?
Yes. Yeah, and I'm thinking again, what's the question? If it was written down, it would be easy. Are you able to send it to me privately? But I think that it is really important for NGOs to think differently about how to get things done and how to work. I think we have seen that there's been a large push for working with the private sector. And when we look at the SDGs, I think the last SDG probably talks about partnerships, I think. my memory serves me well.
Yes.
So I think that NGOs really need to think differently in terms of how they're going to do this. Getting to think that NGOs can get things done just the way they had done them in the past is not going to help anybody in the end. NGOs have to get out and have to look for partnerships with the private sector. They have to look for partnerships in a very, very close way with the local governments, because the local governments basically are the first point of contact for the people in the communities. So NGOs have to think of working very closely with the local government, with the government at different levels, but then also they have to be willing to change. I think it takes a lot of internal, you look at yourself and you kind of do a deep reflection. You do an internal analysis. I think NGOs have to do that for them to be able to own the conversation and to carry on with this and create the change that we want to create at the end of the day.
That's
Not
perfect.
sure I got that.
Yeah, absolutely. One more question and then we'll close. Annabelle?
Okay, so Aldo, you're a popular person. We've got another one on deforestation, but actually we could probably open this question up to the panel as well. So this is from Neil. He's asked, how do you measure avoided deforestation? And maybe a wider question, how do you prove what would have happened without your intervention?
Okay, yes, basically the most effective way to measure deforestation is by satellite images. There is now a very, very interesting development on how to identify forest changes. So basically, in our case, we are measuring with historical series of satellite images to understand the deforestation patterns and how it will change in the future. And this analysis is going to be provided by official office from the Ministry of the Environment. I think and the second part of the question was, sorry?
So it was the question of how do you prove what would have without your intervention?
Yes, but yes, I mean, it's a good question. It's always difficult to measure attribution, but you have different ways to do it. Definitely, in this case, we're using, as I mentioned, historical information, so we understand what happened before, and also we're going to compare communities where we have intervention with communities that are not having this intervention. Yes.
I think we've run out of time. I want to thank everyone, Aldo, Kirk, Sombo, for your passion, your steadfast journey. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience for me having you in our program, and for sharing your impacts, your collaborative approach, which I think again calls out we've got to think and act differently. And Annabelle, I want to thank you. I'll turn it over to you to talk about next steps for potential students who want to join us. And I want to thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gayle, and thank you to everyone that attended the webinar today. I hope you found it useful and enjoyed hearing from our alumni. If you are interested in coming to one of the programs, so we have just finished our final program for 2019, which was social finance, but applications are now open for the 2020 iteration. The dates for impact investing and impact measurement are all on the screen for you. If you would like further information on the programs, please get in touch with me directly. My details are on the next slide. We also have a monthly newsletter. I know we've got quite a number of you registered for that, which just gives you information on what our alumni are doing, what events we have going on both at the school and in the wider community. So please get in touch if you're not registered and you would like to be. And also if you're an alumni and you have a story that you'd like to share, we love to hear from you and find out what you're doing. And we love to share that with our wider impact community as well. So my details are on the screen if anyone would like to get in touch after today. And thank you again, everyone, for coming, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.